How do they choose an advisor? How do they choose a condo? It's all about how do people make decisions. The one common thread through all of these decades of study is that people only do things that align with their values. So that was the eureka moment. It's like, oh, it's not about demographics. It's about values. So we were accidentally saying stuff that aligned with people's values, and that's why they were showing up. So that's a cool thing to know. But how do we know what their values are in advance? That's the secret, right? We need to figure that out. And that's where the work began. And we started to build this massive database. And now we have the ability to understand the values of a group of people that we're targeting before we spend money on them and try and get them to do the things that we want them to
do. This is the Future Ready Advisor, a show about transforming your financial advisory practice. I'm your host, Sam Sivarajan, a wealth management consultant, behavioral scientist, and keynote speaker. In this podcast, I dive deep into the real challenges advisors face and bring you insightful conversations with top industry experts. Together, we'll explore practical strategies grounded in behavioral science to help you better serve your clients, optimize your time, and build a future-ready practice. Hi, everyone. I'm Sam Sivarajan, and welcome to the Future Ready Advisor. Today, I'm delighted to have David Allison with us. David is the founder of the Valuegraphics Research Company, and his book, The Death of Demographics, challenges traditional assumptions about consumer behavior and decision-making. For financial advisors and wealth management executives, this shift from demographics to values-driven insights has profound implications for client engagement, business development, and service personalization. David, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me over, Sam.
Delighted to have you. I'm enjoying your book, and I think that the audience is going to really value your insights as well. David, you've built your career around challenging the way we think about understanding people. What first got you interested in this area, and what was the moment that made you realize that demographics weren't enough?
Well, so the origin story that we're all supposed to be able to pull out of our pocket when we want to. Here we go. I had a marketing company, and we worked specifically with large-scale real estate developers around the world. And we would help them name their buildings and like lease, sell, rent, whatever it is they were trying to do. We'd build those little fancy presentation centers and the brochures and the billboards and all that kind of stuff. And like everybody in every industry, including wealth advisory, the first thing we would do is sit down and try and figure out, who are we doing this for? Who are the clients that we're trying to attract to come and buy or rent or lease stuff? And so we'd use demographics to understand them. And inevitably, the time period I was doing this, it was aging baby boomers. And so we just kept talking about aging baby boomers so much that I eventually just gave them a name. I called them Bob and Sally. So Bob and Sally were always the clients that we were doing things for. So we'd run around and we would do a bunch of creative work and do a bunch of strategic thinking and buy a bunch of media and do all this stuff. And then we'd sit back and we'd see what happened. And we'd sell out a condo tower, let's say, in downtown Gotham City somewhere. And about 4 years later, I would get to be in a room and see all the people who bought condos. And we would be at the grand opening. There'd be a ribbon cutting and we'd lie and tell everybody it was champagne. It was Prosecco. We all knew it was Prosecco, but we kept calling it champagne. And shrimps on sticks. Can't have an opening without shrimps on sticks.
Yes.
And I'd look around the room and go, who the heck are you people? Because you're not the people I targeted. Why are you here? We didn't think about you in terms of our messages. We didn't buy in your channels. And yet here you are. Thank you for showing up, making us look like rock stars, sold out this condo tower. And it was a mystery, but it kept working. So we just kept doing it over and over and over again. To be fair, 10 or 15% of the people in the room were the ones we thought we were talking to. But everybody else was like, I don't know why they're here.
You're happy to have them, but they weren't who you were marketing to.
Exactly. So I sold that company to management and decided I was going to try and crack that nut and figure it out. So I started talking to friends who worked in other sectors like retail and insurance and banking, and said, does this happen to you? Do you target a group? And then other people, all of them said yes. We have no idea why. We have, for example, one friend who was in retail said, we have stores all around the world. We have these personas, these ideas of who we're talking to. And then I go and stand in the stores all around the world and they're not there. All these other people are, but those people we're spending all this time, money trying to talk to, they're not there. So I thought, okay, this is a big inefficiency. We're trying to talk to people, understand people. Whatever tools we're using, they aren't working and we're just getting lucky. So let's see if we can remove some of that risk and figure out what's really going on. So, long story short, quick dive into human behavior and behavioral science. And it becomes very obvious very quickly that regardless of what lens you're looking, psychiatry, sociology, psychology, neurology, all these different groups of scientists who study how do people decide things, which is what we're talking about here. How do they choose an advisor? How do they choose a condo? It's all about how do people make decisions. The one common thread through all of these decades of study is that people only do things that align with their values. So that was the eureka moment. It's like, oh, it's not about demographics. It's about values. So we were accidentally saying stuff that aligned with people's values, and that's why they were showing up. So that's a cool thing to know. But how do we know what their values are in advance? That's the secret, right? We need to figure that out. And that's where the work began. And we started to build this massive database. And now we have the ability to understand the values of a group of people that we're targeting before we spend money on them and try and get them to do the things that we want them to do.
Now, look, it makes intuitive sense, right? I mean, my demographic, whether it's age, whether it's income, whether it's gender, etc., I'd like to believe that I'm not the same as every other person that fits that gender specificity, right? The demographic specificity, I mean. Maybe you can, just for the audience, talk a little bit about what Valuegraphics is, the database that you talked about, like how you've created it, what the data that has gone in, and how you kind of tested it and validated that kind of information that you've got.
Yeah. So we're all familiar with demographics. Demographics are a great description of what people are, but that's it. It's what people are. It's not who they are, right? People inside a demographic cohort, it turns out, after we've done all this research, and I'll tell you about in a second, they only resemble each other about 10% of the time. So Gen Z, they're about 10% similar to each other. So baby boomers, about 10% similar to each other. Men, about 10% similar to each other. So if you're using demographics to try and understand who people are, you're getting it 90% wrong right out the gate. So what else do we have? We have this other tool. Think about this as a three-legged stool. We have psychographics. Psychographics are everything else we know about people from our CRM systems, other research and studies that have been done. How do they feel about things? How do they like stuff? How have they behaved in the past? Let's put it into the world of an advisor. How much of their money am I managing? What kind of portfolio have we built for them? How long have we been working together? Do I know the whole family? Like all these other things, this demographic group. That's all psychographics. Really interesting stuff because you can see some patterns perhaps in the noise, signals that you can go, oh, okay, well, they behave like this. They like this stuff. So keep doing those things. That's probably going to be good. But all of that information has a flaw. And it's that it all comes from the past because we know it. It's all stuff that we wrote down already, right? We know it. Even if it's something from a split second ago, it's historical data. And what we're all trying to understand is how do we get people to do something next? So using historical data to try and figure out the future is like driving the car looking in the rearview mirror. You might get there eventually, but if you're going to hit a telephone pole and end up in the ditch a few times before you actually get where you want to be. So let's recap. Demographics tell us what people are, what they look like on the outside. Psychographics, how they've behaved and all the stuff we know about them so far. What we're missing is how do we get them to do the things we want them to do next? And that's about understanding what their values are. So in order to do this, we had to build this giant database. We've done 1 million surveys now with a big team of translators, 152 languages around the world, hundreds of millions of data points in this data set. And what we've measured and mapped for the very first time is what people's values are. And the way we built this and the methodology we can use, we can go into that data set and go, oh, those folks that you're interested in understanding, your particular clients, people in Canada who have a net income of, we've got an income of $250,000 a year and a net worth of $1.5 million, who are married and empty nesters. What do they all have in common? What are the values they share? Well, it's this, and this. So we can pull that out of the data and say, folks, just like them, here's all the stuff we know about them. So the simplest way to think about this is because of this database, we now know what buttons you need to push to move the needle in the right direction for any group of people that you're trying to understand about anything.
And to be clear, when you say values, you're talking about things like family, health, work, and the relative priority that it has for that individual. But without kind of giving it away, my understanding, and please correct me if I'm wrong, is that there is a lot of overlap and commonality of values that we share across different groups and across different countries and cultures.
Yes.
The way that that value is expressed or the priority of that value may differ from group to group. And that's really part of the secret sauce of what your research and demographic that you provide, et cetera, is to kind of understand for that particular demographic segment how the values might stack up.
Yeah. So let's talk about that. Good question. Values, the definition that we use, there seems to be other people have different ways of thinking about this, but for us, a value is something that people use to make as a filtering mechanism to make every decision in their life. So if family is one of your values, you're consciously or subconsciously, you're going to make every decision about everything thousands of times a day based on whether or not it's going to be good for your family. And you might not even know you're doing it, but you're going to be so focused on that. It's a filter that you use for everything. Now, many people don't have family as one of their values, and they're not running around trying to make every decision. They may have, let's say, ambition as one of their values, and they're going to make every decision in their life based on whether or not it's helping with their goals and with their ambition. Right. So it turns out, after talking to 1 million people, that there's only 56 values. So that's not something we knew going in. We talked to 1 million people, listened to why they're doing the things they're doing and how they live their lives. And you go, seems like there's 56 buttons here that we could be pushing in various combinations in order to understand individuals and therefore groups of people. So that's the definition for values. There's only 56 of them. You're correct to say that some groups of people will have this set of values and some will have that set of values. They will overlap in some cases and not overlap in other cases. But it's truly the secret to understanding. If you think about groups of people like schools of fish, there's this school of fish, and you see them in the Jacques Cousteau undersea documentaries, right? They move like a group. So why are they moving like that? Why does this group suddenly vote for this person? Why does this group suddenly go and buy that kind of car? Well, now we know why, because they're chasing a certain set of values that they have in common. So this school of fish are off doing their own thing. This other school of fish are off doing their own thing. Sometimes they come together, and some of those members of those two groups of fish might overlap. But now we can figure all that out. We can see why people are behaving the way they do, why their tribe, why their group, why their cohort is going in one direction and not in another.
No, I think that's completely fascinating. And I think you said something earlier that deeply resonates with me, that psychographics is about the past. And I think particularly in the world of financial advice, that's something that we should resonate with us, right? Because we always say past performance does not guarantee future results.
The old safe harbor statement, right?
It's a safe harbor statement. But I also see, like, look, I've always felt that, okay, the way that you've reacted, for example, in the 2008 crash, it's interesting to know, but it's not defining how you're going to react to the next one. Your circumstances are different. Your assessment of risk and everything else is different. So relying on a past behavior or a past preference is important to be aware of, but it's not definitive. And what you're saying, I think, is that if you are aware of their values, those values are, as a group, are relatively constant, whether it's in the past or the way that you're going to express it in the future. Is that fair?
I mean, let's be frank. As advisors who are listening to this, that your client doesn't know what they want. Your job is to help them understand what they really need. Now they're going to come in guns a-blazing and say, I want this, I want that, I want this, I want that. Sure, important to listen to all of that stuff. But the reason you add value to that relationship is because you can listen between the lines, look at what they've done in the past, understand what's happening in the markets, look at all the different products and services you can put them into and say, they need this. Now, that might be a change from what they think they need. So your job is to figure out, how do I show them that this is aligned with their values? How do I convince them that this thing that I know is right for them is the right thing for them? Well, to do that, you need to understand what their values are. You need to be proposing values aligned solutions to the problems that they're putting in front of you and the goals and things they want you to help. But you need to do this all this work based on their values. If you can sit down with a client and say, listen, I know you said this, and this, and this, but if your goal is this, honestly, You need to be thinking about these things and doing it this way. And here's why. And if you keep that here's why aligned with what their values are, they're going to light up like a Christmas tree and feel like you've been reading their diary and the deep inner workings of their hearts and their minds. And that you're absolutely correct. And that's why they'll stay with you, is because you understand them that well. You're not just putting them into products and services that are aligned with their demographic, because they're only 10% accurate. Demographics are only 10% accurate.
No, I think that's bang on, and I think even what their stated preferences are, because I think the reality is, as you said, and my experience shows that they believe they want something, but only because they're told that they want to believe it. I had a client that came in saying that in 2007 that they wanted to 15% returns, and when I asked him why, then we figured out what his value really was. It wasn't 15% returns. That's just a number that he picked up because somebody else had mentioned it to him at at a cocktail party or something else. Right. You're right. I think trying to align with that's the art, trying to align with their deepest values, I think is going to create a level of trust and a client relationship that I think is going to stand the test of time with market volatility and everything else.
Listen, I speak to, do a lot of work as a public speaker, and I've spoken to so many groups of wealth advisors and financial advisors and insurance advisors, and you name it. I've been in front of the biggest companies in the world talking about this stuff. And the one thing I've noticed from having conversations with individual advisors before or after my time on stage is the good ones are the ones who realize that it's a cliche to say this is a relationship business.
Right.
There's all kinds of computer programs and things you can subscribe to that tell you all the stuff that you need to know about the numbers and the spreadsheets and all that kind of, and yeah, you need to understand that stuff. But really, the great advisors are the ones who end up being so tight with their clients that their clients aren't going to go buy a stick of gum without asking their advice first. My kids are going off to college in the next 5 years. I'm worried. How can we I'm thinking about selling the second home. I'm thinking about buying a third car. I'm thinking about my wife and I want to go on a great vacation. You want those clients to be calling you for all of that.
Right.
Because that's what embeds you in their lives and makes you an invaluable part of their family. And in order to do that, you need to know what's driving them. You need to know who they are on the inside. You need to understand how to connect with them at that level, like you connect with your best friends. Exactly what you need to do and say to keep your friends happy and engaged. And you need to understand them that well. And to do that, you need to know what their values are.
No, I think that's a great point. Now, it sounds easy, and obviously it's much harder. And I think one wrinkle, and it's an eye-opening example that you shared with me when we chatted earlier, is your Fox News and CNN study. The two audiences that most of us would assume are polar opposites, that their values are completely don't overlap at all. Can you share your findings?
Yeah, I will. And I just need everybody who's listening, regardless of your political affiliations, to just park your emotions until I'm done, because this is a very hot topic right now for all kinds of obvious reasons. But when Mr. Trump first threw his hat in the political ring in the first time round, I started to see some divisiveness going on in the United States. And selfishly, I thought this would be a great opportunity for me to get some media coverage. So I thought, how can I just once in my life hear the Anderson Cooper say, according to a new Valuegraphics study, that was my goal. That's all I wanted. I just wanted to hear Anderson Cooper say that once out loud. I thought, okay, well, the media loves reporting on the media. So if I did a study, instead of looking at Republicans versus Democrats and taking advantage of this divisiveness in the United States for my own personal gain, if I did the study on Fox News loyalists versus CNN loyalists, I'd be getting to the same place, but I'd be doing it in a way that was like clickbait for Anderson Cooper.
Right.
And wanted to talk about those folks from Fox. So we launched a study, used our hundreds of millions of data points, profiled folks who were hardcore CNN versus hardcore Fox viewers. And what we found is that there was no story there. I never got my wish. I never got Anderson Cooper interested, because here's what we found. For all the values that rank in the top 10, 12, 13 values for both of those audiences, they're very, very similar. So for example, the value of family, incredibly important on both sides. Now, what they think is right for their family is different, but the point is they agree that family is one of the fundamental core filters that they're using to make every decision in their life. So the end of the story is this: fast forward January 6th, a few years later, that day on the Capitol when the mobs broke in and caused all kinds of havoc. And you can view that through a historical lens however you want. I'm not here to be on either side of this. I'm here to say this. There was a moment where a police officer thought he was going to die. We've all seen the footage. He's been pressed up against a wall behind an iron fence, and people are pushing on it and shoving it. And he's crying and screaming and yelling. And he thought he was going to die. People are beating him with the ends of flagpoles, and they are screaming out loud. If you listen to the audio, kill him, until he says, I have kids. And that's the moment that you could feel the energy in that clip just kind of change. And people backed off. Now, they didn't like apologize and give him a kiss on the forehead and give him a Band-Aid, but they didn't kill him. He did not die. His soul was saved that day because of that value of family. And the people who were on the other side of that confrontation, they did not become murderers that day. Their souls were saved too because of the shared importance of that value. So in those heightened moments like that, which hopefully none of us will ever have to experience, if a value can bring those two sides together, that's how powerful they are. Now imagine if you knew that about the people you're trying to engage and motivate and inspire in your life, how powerful it would be to be able to point to those things that you have in common and say, I understand you. I know who you are. I know what you're trying to do. And so let me help you with that.
No, that's a very powerful story. And it reminded me of Jonathan Haidt's work in the book, The Righteous Mind, where he was looking at more on the moral value side. But he found something similar, that people across political and cultural lines often hold the same values. They just differ in priority that they give those values and how they choose to act on them. So to your example of Fox versus CNN, family is important to both. Their definition of family may just be very different. And the way that they think they support and prioritize family may be very different.
But when you think about conflict resolution, the first step, nothing good in the world has ever been solved by doubling down on what makes us different.
Right.
Nothing ever. History teaches us this. The only way to get to a solution around anything is to find common ground. And then from there, work on solving the places where you don't agree. So I'm just somebody pointed this out to me the other day, and I'm just fascinated with it. And I've been starting to dive in a bit. But if you look at training for hostage negotiations, the first thing that a hostage negotiator tries to do while they're talking to someone who's got 20 people locked in a bank with a gun is to find some common ground, to find some common values. And once they can see each other in each other, then they can start to figure out how we're going to get ourselves out of this situation. They're incredibly, insanely powerful to understand what someone else values. And now that you've been listening to this podcast, my friends who are listening, hi, how are you? You'll start to notice this when you're in a situation where somebody's upset. If you can ask some questions and figure out where's that really coming from? What values are they feeling are threatened right now? You'll be able to talk them down. Or when you see somebody who's elated or incredibly excited about something that's happened, ask them some questions. You'll see where that's coming from. And you get to know a little bit about their values. And now you can hopefully help them have more of those moments in their life. So it's like a magic parlor trick sometimes, but it's really just human nature.
No, that's what I found powerful. And I like your example of the hostage negotiator. I mean, it doesn't mean that the negotiator is agreeing with the hostage taker, but I think in many cases, the reason that they resolve peacefully is that it's not that the person taking hostages thought that he was going to escape free and that he suddenly says, you know what, okay, I'm okay with jail, etc. I think that it's just, in many cases, they wanted to be heard, right? Yeah. And they never felt that they were heard. And the hostage negotiator was the first person to kind of engage them in that kind of conversation to kind of be heard. Now, this is a very extreme example, right? Like we're not going there, etc. But I think that I think for all of us in any kind of people relationship type of business as financial advisors or in marketing, etc., I think we're dealing with people that want to feel heard, right? That this is the need that you're looking to serve, etc., why you want to be my financial advisor. And the more that you can convey to them that you have actually heard what they're saying and what they're not saying, I think it goes back to the point that you've got you built trust and value in that relationship, right?
Oh, Sam, it's the wealth advisory community has been talking about values-driven investment advice for a decade or more. And here's the issue, and why I'm so glad that we're having this chat today. The way we the way everybody, not just the wealth advisory world, but everybody, the way we've been trying to figure out values so far has been by asking people, "What are your values?" And when you do that, people will, I guarantee it, they're going to lie.
They're going to tell you what they think you want to hear.
Or some version of themselves that they would like you to, or that they maybe are convinced themselves that this is who I'd like to be, but it's not really the values they're operating on at a neurological level to make all their decisions in life.
Right.
So what you got to do is get past that. I mean, think about it. You put 100 people in a room and say, okay, who values family? Like, who's not putting up their hands, right? They're going to look like a serial killer if they don't put their hand up at that moment. Who values the environment? Like, everybody's going to put up their hand, right? But there's people out there who don't value the family and don't value the environment. And so you got to be able to find a way to get past those surface level questions.
Right.
So our research is all based on what we call secondary lines of questioning.
Okay.
So we've never asked anybody about their values. We've asked them about their day and about what they do with their hobbies and their what kind of sports they're into and how do they feel about religion and marriage and sex and relationships and friendship and all these other sorts of things. And when you listen to people talk about what they do and the decisions they make, you listen to 1 million people around the world tell you all that stuff, you see patterns. And you're like, these folks are all talking about family. There's a thing. That's a value, right? So you got to come at it in a more scientific way than I know many of the ways that we've been trying to do it so far.
That totally makes sense. So this is behavioral finance at its core. What people say and what people do are very different things. And to go back to your example of, do you care about the environment? Nobody, or virtually no one's going to say that they're not. The deeper level questions are going to be, well, what do you drive? What do you have you donated to environmental causes? Are you paying more for local food versus cheaper processed food? There's a whole host of questions that you can ask, but those kind of questions actually elicit the actual behavior, right? That if you were environmentally, you don't have to do all of it, right? But if you are truly environment truly matters to you, but you're not doing anything that is pro environment, et cetera, then it's perhaps not a real value.
So
Is that a fair comment to make?
It is. It goes one layer deeper, though. So let's say you ask people, have they ever donated to an environmental cause? And so that gets you to a behavior that would seem to support that they have some sort of concern for the environment, unless they're doing it because their friends pressured them into it.
Right.
Or because by making that donation, they are now allowed to sit in a certain place at the big gala fundraising dinner. And that's about social standing and status, not necessarily about the environment.
Yeah.
Right. So looking at behaviors is one level better, but you want to understand why those behaviors. What's driving that? A great example, the times we're in right now, some of my examples need updating, but I always used to talk about Tesla as an example. Why would you buy a Tesla? Now, forget about the current kerfuffle about Teslas. When they first came out, they were seen as a badge of honor, that this is a proof that I'm an environmentally friendly person. Right. And Hollywood movie stars were falling over themselves to get into Teslas. But why? Was it really because they cared about the environment, or because Hollywood movie stars were falling all over themselves to get into Teslas, or because all my friends had one, or the ladies I play bridge with once a week all have one? Or what was the real impetus there? People buying Teslas were not all concerned with the environment. There's all kinds of reasons why that behavior was coming to the forefront.
That's a great point. So, David, you've applied value graphics across multiple industries, from media to healthcare to marketing. Can you share with our financial advisor audience an example of two of where you think it's had a significant impact, and perhaps the lessons that financial advisors may draw from that to their own work?
Yeah. Okay. So I'm going to tell you the lesson for this story in advance. The lesson is, don't judge a book by its cover. And here's the story. I was asked to come and speak to a large international conference of people who own companies who employ the blue collar trades. So their employees are HVAC technicians, carpenters, electricians, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And they asked me to get up on stage and speak about how do we get more people to get into the blue collar trades? Because like many professions, they're having a hard time with talent recruitment. It's a difficult thing to get more folks to jump into that industry. And in that industry in particular, you got to go into an apprenticeship program and get your ticket, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So we did our study. And like I do for every keynote, I profile a group of folks that my audience wants to understand. And I get up and tell them what I found. And one of the things I found was that this audience of people who have considered a career in the blue collar trades, but are not yet quite made the jump. One of the things they over index on, like an insane amount, a huge, huge margin, is the value of service to others. Now, it's not a hugely normal value for us to see. It's not high on the list many, many, many times in many, many places. We see it every now and then, but this was off the charts more important to this group of folks who are considering a career in the blue collar trades. So I got up on stage and I said, listen, you're saying all the right things, my friends. You're saying what? You're going to earn more money. You can get out of the shift work at the bar, the restaurant, the grocery store where you're working right now. Get into an apprenticeship program. You're going to have a solid skill that's transferable. Maybe this is your chance to settle down and build a family. You don't want to work weekends anymore. I get it. This is a great way to do that. But what you're not saying that you should be saying is this is your chance to be in a helping profession. This is going to help people have a safe, warm, comfortable place to live and work and play and grow. So I finished and did the rest of my speech, and I get down off the stage, and this guy comes over to me and he said, listen, I have a story for you. I said, okay, cool. What's your story? He said, I have 7 offices in 7 cities across the southern United States. And in each office, there's a fleet of vans. And in each fleet of vans, there's one that's painted pink, because all the money from that pink van every day goes to fund breast cancer research, because my wife, he had a story why they settled on that. I said, my friend, that's amazing. Look at you. You found the service to others value. You did not need to be here today to listen to my keynote. You found it on your, he said, no, that's not the story. Okay, what's the story? I said, well, the story is every day at every office, my guys, who's still largely guys in that industry, my guys fight over who gets to be in the pink van.
Seriously.
They fight over it, because service to others is such an important value. They're looking for everything they can. So now here's back to my lesson. Don't judge a book by its cover. If I'd sat down and said to you, okay, our job today is to figure out what we can do to help some folks in the blue collar trades, would we have ever got to pink vans? Never. We'd have got to stereotypes about blue collar trades. They're guys. They probably like their beer. NASCAR is probably a big thing for them. We're going to talk to them about sports, because these are men's men who are going to enjoy their football, their hockey, whatever it is.
Right.
We've never gotten to pink vans. But here we have this
relying
data.
on demographics and psychographics, right?
Exactly.
To get to that assessment.
Yeah. So
that's really cool.
Understand the values, and you get to those little secret things, those little unexpected nuggets that tell you who people really are on the inside.
That's cool.
Yeah. It's a good story. I like that one.
Now, you've talked about creating quote unquote fast friends at scale by aligning with people's values. Can you explain this concept and how advisors might be able to use this insight to build deeper trust with their clients faster?
Yeah, that's 2 questions. So first, you have to remind me of the second one after I get through the first one, because as you probably discovered by now, I tend to ramble a little bit. So let's start with fast friends at scale. So this is just another way to think about this, because we've all had this happen to us, where we've been away on a vacation or at a conference or something. It generally happens when we're outside of our normal routine, and you meet someone for the very first time and you talk to them for 10 minutes and you just click, and it's like you've known each other your whole lives. And you might even say that, like, are you sure we haven't met before? This is really weird. It's kind of uncanny that I know you this well, and you're finishing each other's jokes before the punchline, and you just like, something's going on here. And then the next day you meet your new friend for breakfast, let's say at the conference, and they're not in a great mood. They had a bad phone call from home last night. Something happened. I don't know what it was, but you'd know exactly what you needed to say in order to cheer that person up. Because what has happened here is you've met someone whose values are just like yours. They're using the same filters to process the world around them. So when they're sad, when they're upset, how they're processing that and how to talk to them in a way that's going to cheer them up. Right. If something great happens, you probably don't even need to talk to each other. Something crazy happens over on the other side of the room. You're at a cocktail reception and suddenly Stephen King's clown just shows up and is standing over in the corner looking all creepy. And you just look at each other and you just go, you don't even need to talk, because you're processing the world in the same way. So that's a fast friend. Now, if you understand your clients or the folks you would like to have as your next set of clients, if you understand them that well, that's fast friends at scale. Now, exactly what you need to do to get them excited, to relate to them in a way that you don't even need to speak half the time because you just know each other that well. Now, coming to work every day is just about doing things for your friends. How to get your friends excited, to get your friends to agree with you, to get your friends to, I don't know, go hang gliding this afternoon, something kooky that you would never otherwise do because you know how to talk to them. So, how can financial advisors use this? This is the second part of your question.
Right. See, you remember.
Yeah, I did. I did. That's very unusual for me. I'm old. I walk into a room sometimes. I don't remember why I walked into a room. So it's crazy. How can financial advisors use this? Well, I mean, the obvious answer to that question is you got to figure out what your client's values are. So how can you do that? I'm going to give you 3 questions. Before I do that, here's the first thing you got to do. Start asking the right questions. We all send out surveys and we all trying to find out more. And we ask about demographics. How old are you and how many kids you have and what's changed about your income? And we ask all that kind of stuff. But as we know, all that does is give us about a 10% correct guess at who these folks are. And we ask questions about ourselves, like, what do you think of my service? Am I amazing? Would you would you tell your friends about me? Like, we like to know what they think about us. But what we never do is ask them, what's on your mind? What gets you up in the middle of the night with worry? And what makes you elated? So find ways to ask questions about what's going on in their life. And if you listen to those the answers, you'll start to see patterns. You'll start to see that, wow, the things that excite them, the things that depress them, the things that they're worried about, the things that they're focused on, somehow all has to do with ambition or family or the environment or personal growth or health and well-being or whatever it might be. You'll start to see those patterns emerge, and those are their values rising up to the top. So these 3 questions I will give you, you can use these word for word, or you can put them in your own words, but we call them the 3 telltale questions. We've tested these around the world with everybody from Wall Street hedge fund investors to doctors who volunteer their time with the United Nations to everybody you can imagine. And if you ask these questions and listen, you've got to really actively listen. People will tell you what their values are. So the first question, why do you go to work? You'll hear everything from, it's where my friends are. I feel like I'm making a difference. I'm trying to provide for my family. I want to work on my art collection. There's all kinds of different reasons why people make the decision, which is driven by their values, to do this thing they do for 8 or 10 hours a day, 6 or 7 days a week. So that's the first one. The second one, you just won the lottery. Why would you give away half? Not who would you give it to, but why? Why would you do that? So trying to understand the values that drive that decision, right? And the third one, which is my favorite, and is a great friend tester. Get your friends over for dinner, give them all a couple glasses of wine, pop this question out, and you'll learn a lot about your friends. You get to say one thing to yourself from 10 years ago, just one thing. What would it be and why that thing? And frankly, I really don't care what it is you want to tell yourself. Buy Google stock, like whatever. But why would you choose that of all the things that you could have said to yourself? Why that one? Now, if you ask those questions often enough, you slide them into conversation, put them into your next survey that goes out. I mean, if you're managing a team, get your team to use those as like networking event, cocktail chatter, do as many things as you can. Listen for the commonality. People will answer them in different ways. They'll use their own words. But what you're trying to do here is figure out what is the impetus, the triggers, the drivers behind these monumental decisions of why do you go to work? Why would you give away a bunch of money? And what would you say to yourself if you got to say one thing to yourself from 10 years ago? Those are values. Those are values bubbling to the surface. And in a large and complex and statistically accurate way, that's what we've done a million times around the world in 152 different languages. And far more questions, far more academically precise. But it's the same process as those 3 telltale questions.
That's awesome. I love it. Great questions. How do you see Valuegraphics, the research, the database, applying it, complementing the traditional CRM data that advisors have to use? I mean, you're not talking about replacing it. You're talking about complementing it to give a more complete picture of their clients. And because I asked 2-part questions, I mean, just so that you can think about this, what's your vision for how advisors can integrate this thinking of the complement of the two into their everyday practice?
Okay, well, I'm glad you asked this question. We've already covered the first half of that, really. It's a 3-legged stool, right? You still need the demographic information. As an advisor, knowing that your client is on the verge of retirement is an important thing to know. That's a demographic piece of information. You still need the psychographics, the second leg of the stool, knowing that they are absolutely risk adverse and they lost all their money in the great crash of 2008 or whatever. That's really good to know because that'll help you figure out what to do. We also got to know what they freaking care about so much that they use it to make every decision in every aspect of their life, whether they know they're doing it or not. You got to have all three. Demographics describe a group of people. Psychographics are a record of what's come before. And value graphics tell you how to engage, inspire, and influence what they do next. So you need all three. Where do I see this going? We're actually talking to a few different organizations about partnering and beginning in the wealth advisory world to build a dashboard that would, or a SaaS app or something. I don't know exactly what it's going to be yet, but we want to find a way for individual wealth advisors, either at one particular company or maybe just one at a time. Again, not sure how we're going to approach this, but we can build a tool that allows an advisor to enter information about the demographics and psychographics that will then provide them with the accurate value graphics for that client. And if it's plugged into, say, some XYZ Investment Inc.'s products and services, it would also then be able to link to those and say, and here's the sort of portfolio mix that makes sense for those values, for those people based on those demographics and psychographics. So I desperately want to build this thing, because then once we're finished doing that in the wealth advisory world, we can take that thing and we can build the same tool for people who manufacture pet food and for people who sell luxury vacations. And so because the wealth advisory world has been so focused on values-driven investing for so long, it seems to me to be the place to begin to build this initial tool and then use it as a way to, as a prototype, if you will, for how we can do this in other industries. So actively engaged in conversations with some really interesting organizations about that. Open to more, by the way, if anyone's listening and wants to have that chat. And yeah, we'll see where it goes from here.
Very interesting. So I'm going to ask you to take out your crystal ball. Fast forward 5 to 10 years. How do you see, or what would you like to see happen in that values-based insights transforming the financial services industry?
I think you all have this sorted out already, that aligning investments, which is, when you think about it, what's more personal? This is people's money. This is their livelihood. This is their ability to provide for their family. Knowing that that is aligned with their values, you've already all figured that out. I can't tell you how many conferences I've spoken at that have been about values-driven investment strategies. You know this term. So that's great. I hope that it takes a lot less time than 10 years, that we're able to actually find a way to inject into this industry accuracy around that promise. You all know where you want to get to. And so far, the data has been missing to make it an accurate, statistically representative possibility. And we got that data. It's important. We got to try and bridge that gap. And I don't think it's going to take it 10 years. I think it's going to take a lot less than that. So hopefully we can make this whole notion of values-driven investing a reality and a truth instead of a wish and a hope and a dream.
Well, and I'll say one thing. I think that what is really resonating in a lot of financial advisors' minds is the advent of AI and the technical stuff that's coming in. And in my mind, and I've said this many times, the key, it's not that AI is going to put financial advisors out of work. I think it's going to help financial advisors focus on what makes them different. It's the human element. Yeah. And you're adding another part of it is that if you can actually identify the values and be able to align with your clients' values, I don't think AI has got a hope in trying to match that anytime soon.
And here's the thing, that human element, we keep talking about that, about how that's what we need, the challenge we need to rise up to right now is to lean into being more human. And that's noble. But understanding human behavior, it's a messy thing. Like you just look at basic supply and demand and economics. What happens in the real world versus what should happen based on basic laws of economics are not always human beings are irrational, illogical, messy, emotional creatures. So we tend to talk about wanting to be more human, but we run away from it when it comes to actually putting money on the table because it's just unpredictable. So The change here is now it's not unpredictable. Now we have data. And I'm at this moment where with my work where I'm just trying to find a way to bridge that gap between, yeah, we all want to be more human. And now we have data that allows us to do that in a way that is not full of risk, that is precise. And so just making that last leap. I've been working on this for 10 years, building this data set and figuring out this methodology and doing all of the things we've done. We're just like, we're so close to the finish line now where we can just jump across and say, okay, finally, human behavior is not a guess. Human behavior is now measurable and mappable, and we will know how people will react if you do this versus how they'll react if you do that. So close.
No, I think that makes total sense. And I'll add one thing before we go to the closing segment of the podcast. I think what you were saying is bang on. I think for much of the 20th century, people talked about the rational person and how people make decisions. And so anybody that did something that was deemed irrational, that didn't fit that rational model, was deemed irrational. Behavioral finance and behavioral science came in to say, well, there are actually things that are going on that we're not observing, but that actually, when you dig down into it, it's not irrational, right? We just don't understand what's going on in people's heads.
Well, the best
What you're saying
example
is that going down even one step further to say that behind even that is their values. So what may on the surface appear irrational may be very aligned if you understand the client's values and why this decision is aligned with their values. Irrationality goes out of the picture at that stage, right?
The most obvious and almost cliche example of this in the economics world is Veblen goods, right? You jack the price of something, it's supposed to temper
Right.
demand. But with Veblen goods, you jack the price on something and people want more of it and more people want it. So that's totally irrational unless you realize that by making it more expensive for some folks, that's now more aligned with their values. It's more exclusive and more of a status symbol than it was before. So it becomes very logical when you look at it based on why are people behaving the way they're behaving.
Well, this is why Tiffany sales still goes up in recessions and market downturns, right? So it's recession proof. David, we're coming to the end of our podcast, so I have a few final rapid fire questions for you that I ask all my guests.
Okay, so, I'll warn you, I don't have a very much of an internal filter, so I have no idea what'll come out of my mouth if it's supposed to be rapid fire. Let's see what happens.
No worries. So that's even better. So professionally, what is the most important lesson you've learned over the years?
The last one. And the last one I've learned is that you can't worry about everything. Real wisdom comes from understanding what you can ignore.
I totally agree. And that comes with time and experience, right? Number 2, what is one practical tip you would offer listeners keen on applying your insights?
Don't judge a book by its cover. Just because you run into somebody who you think fits into some kind of demographic category, understand that demographics is nothing more than large-scale stereotyping, and that it's absolutely inaccurate. Just because you understand that a group of people might be wealthy, that you're trying to understand how to attract my next group of high net worth or ultra high net worth individuals that I want in my practice, doesn't mean they're all the same as each other. They all have different ideas of what's important. Demographics are incredibly misleading. So just check yourself every time you find yourself thinking about people based on a demographic stereotype.
I think that is real great wisdom. Couldn't agree more. David, this has been a fascinating discussion, so thank you.
I thought you said there was 3 rapid fire questions. That was only 2.
Is there any more lessons that you would share to?
Okay, it's an open-ended one. I was supposed to have read the show notes before we began, so I should have known that in advance. An open-ended, one last lesson that I would like to share. Yeah, there is. In fact, there's this. This is focus on values, and understanding people based on values is going to make you more successful. It's going to work better. I promise that. 100%. But there's a bigger and more important reason why we have to be doing this. And it's about those demographic stereotypes. Because if we don't start understanding ourselves and people around us based on what's on the inside, and we continue doing it based on what's on the outside, what we're doing is inadvertently, innocently reinforcing those demographic stereotypes. Boomers are terrible with technology, and Gen Z are shiftless and don't know what they want out of life. And women all like pink, and gay people all really enjoy going to Pride and throwing glitter around. And like we have all of these different stereotypes, and they're inaccurate, they're harmful, they are oftentimes hurtful. But more importantly, those stereotypes that we're perpetuating by continuing to rely on demographics, they fuel ageism, sexism, racism, homophobia, ableism, classism. Those are problems we're grappling with around the world right now because we insist on thinking about people based on demographic stereotypes. So we got to stop. It's better for us. It's more accurate to use values. It's going to make us more money, make us more successful, and we can make the world a little bit of a better place while we're doing it. So you don't get a twofer like that in business very often. And this is one of those cases.
David, that's deep, powerful, and probably the subject for a whole new other episode. So we might have to explore that next. But this has been a really, really fascinating discussion. If listeners want to learn more about you or find your work, where do they go?
A couple places. Find me on LinkedIn. I'm pretty active there. We're always sharing new insights and data and stuff that we find. And then there's two websites. There's valuegraphics.com. Valuegraphics is all one word, like demographics, valuegraphics.com. That's the research company. And then I've mentioned that I also do a lot of work as a keynote speaker, getting out there and being an evangelist for this stuff. And that's davidallisoninc.com. So either one of those or LinkedIn is a good option.
Awesome. David, thank you so much for joining us today on the Future Ready Advisor.
Thanks for having me over. Really enjoyed the chat.
In this episode of the Future Ready Advisor, I spoke with David Allison, founder of the Valuegraphics Research Company, about why understanding client values and not just demographics is the key to deeper relationships and better outcomes. Here are my 3 key takeaways. Number 1, demographics are only 10% accurate. David's research reveals that people within the same demographic group only resemble each other about 10% of the time. Whether it's Generation Z, baby boomers, or high net worth individuals, relying on age, income, or other surface level characteristics means we're getting it wrong 90% of the time. The real driver of decisions isn't what people look like on the outside. It's the values they use as filters for every choice they make. Number 2, ask the right questions to uncover true values. Instead of asking clients what their values are, because they'll lie or give socially acceptable answers, David shared 3 powerful telltale questions. A, why do you go to work? B, you just won the lottery. Why would you give away half? And C, what's one thing you would tell yourself from 10 years ago, and why that thing? These questions reveal the deeper motivations behind life's biggest decisions, giving advisors a roadmap to align their advice with what truly matters to each client. Number 3, values create fast friends at scale. When you understand someone's core values, you can connect with them at the same level as your closest friends. You know what excites them, what worries them, and how to communicate in ways that resonate deeply. This isn't just about better client relationships. It's about transforming your practice from product-focused to truly human-centered, creating the kind of trust that no robo-advisor can replicate. David reminds us that in an age of AI and automation, our competitive advantage lies not in the technical stuff, but in understanding the messy, emotional, deeply human reasons why people make financial decisions. And that's no longer guesswork when you know their values. You've been listening to the Future Ready Advisor. If you enjoyed the show, please leave a review on Apple Podcasts or a rating on Spotify, or share your feedback wherever you listen. Be sure to follow the podcast so you never miss an episode. For more insights on how to keep your practice future ready, visit www.samsivarajan.com. You can find the link on the show notes. There you'll find free tools and resources, along with exclusive bonus content from these podcasts. Thanks for tuning in, and I look forward to sharing more strategies with you in the next episode.